It's good to be with all of you. Let me just get a few things out of the way. One, I love Mitty. Just don't tell the folks at Bellarmine. It's going to be our little secret. And the other thing is I'm so honored and privileged to travel here for these brief 36 hours or whatever it is with two homies from Homeboy Industries, Enrique Reyes, we call him Junior, and Luis Morataya, who it's the privilege of my life to know these two gentlemen, and some of you will be able to talk to them afterwards at a class that we're going to go attend. And I do want to say that Luis chose Mitty to be the place where today he celebrates his 21st birthday. So, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. At our morning meeting, which we missed this morning at 8:50, we always sing happy birthday. We would have sung it to you this morning. And then we always say, and we're glad you were born. Everybody shouts, we're glad you were born. We're glad you're born, son. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. What Martin Luther King says about church could well be said of your time here at Mitty. It's not the place you've come to, it's the place you go from. And you go from here to be light. But it's a particular kind of light. It's a light that people can see by. And that's the point. We all want to choose to be that light. The Christmas carol says, long lay the world in sin and error pining until he appeared and the soul felt its worth. And yet it's a song about Jesus, and yet it's a song about Christmas, but how is it not the job description of everyone in this Mitty community? You appear and the soul feels its worth. So it's about choosing to be a light that people can see from. I remember a number of years ago on another trip with two homies, we went to Sacramento and we were going to give a bunch of talks up there, and it was shortly after the 2016 presidential election, and we got there kind of later than I like to arrive at places, and it was on a Sunday evening, and it was we were tired, and we were going to get on this shuttle bus to take us to the rental car place. If you've ever been to Sacramento Airport, the trip from the terminal to the rental place is kind of secluded and dark and wooded, and so we get on the bus, and I'm with Rob and Carlos, and we call Carlos Chamuco because he's got big old devil's horns tattooed on his forehead along with a lot of other ink. And so I'm sitting across Rob on the shuttle bus, but Chamuco sits at the very back, and people are piling onto the bus, and I watch people get to Chamuco near the seats, and they in their minds they go, oh hell no, I'm not going to sit next to this guy. And they do this little foxtrot dance to avoid sitting next to him because he looks scary, I guess. Until the bus fills up and there are no other seats left except one on either side of Chamuco, and people very reluctantly sit down, and then we take off. Well, somewhere in midpoint on the way to the rental car place, the shuttle bus conks out, and the woman driving, she turns the key. She goes, I'm sorry, I'm working on it, and we can hear the click of the key. And we're in the middle of dark seclusion, wooded. And for some reason, nobody is speaking. And then out of the darkness, a voice breaks the silence, and it's Chamuco from the back of the bus. And he says, I saw this in a movie once. It does not end well. Well, we died laughing. I mean, it was one at the home we stay at Homeboy Industries. At Homeboy, we laugh from the stomach. We laugh from the stomach. It was unanimous laughter. And I suspect that half of that shuttle bus had voted one way in 2016, and the other half had voted another way. But the laughter was unanimous from the stomach, unifying, bridging the distance that separates us and announcing that separation is an illusion. And all of it was brought to you by a guy with devil's horns. And it was a light that everybody could see by. You appear, and the soul will feel its worth. And suddenly, you've bridged a distance that separates us. This place was never a place you came to, but only a place you would go from, and that's your task, to be a light that people can see by. I just got back from Boston, and also I had two homies with me, and we gave a lot of talks all over the place. And so we were staying in the historic part of Boston, and I told these two homies, Saul and Brandon, I said, hey, get lost, go see the city. And so they did. And Saul was telling me later, Saul, who had just finished 9-year stretch in prison, and he told me that when he was out touring the historic part of Boston, he was standing in front of a courthouse, an old courthouse, and he was taking a picture of himself. And there were two homeless guys on a bench not far from him. And one of the guys starts yelling at Saul, hey, don't take my picture. And the guy sitting next to him, who was kind of a calmer soul, says, hey, relax, he's taking a selfie. I don't care if he's taking a selfie. I don't want anyone. And he's just kind of cuckoo bird going off on Saul. And Saul walks towards the hostility rather than away from it. And he looks at the guy who was screaming at him and continuing to scream at him. And he says, my name is Saul. I'm from Los Angeles. I've never been to Boston before. I don't care where you're from or if you've never been here before. It's just going on and on. And he won't stop, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs. And the calmer guy looks at Saul and he says, don't mind us. We're crazy. And Saul extends his hand to the screaming guy, and he says, that's okay. I'm crazy too. And they shake hands, and he finds out that the screaming guy's name is Marvin. And the calmer guy's name is Louis. And they talk for a long time until finally Saul says, hey, I gotta go. And Marvin, the ranting guy, his voice now is calm and still. And he says, I've lived all my life here in Boston. Do you need directions somewhere? And Saul was a light that people can see by. He decided to embrace a tenderness that ventilates the world. And he was able to soften this guy into some gentle, kind corner. He appeared, and Marvin's soul felt its worth. We belong to each other, and our task, not just at Advent or in Christmas, is to be in the world who God is, loving, kind. We receive the tender glance. We choose to be the tender glance with each other. And suddenly all distance has been bridged. At Homeboy Industries, we have 10 different social enterprises, and 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors, and we have tattoo removal and a lot of classes. And somebody asked Junior earlier, what do you do at Homeboy? And he says, I work on myself, which is the task to heal, to transform your pain so you don't have to transmit it anymore. And in the early days, many years ago, one of our enterprises was a graffiti removal crew made up, like all our businesses, of rival enemy gang members working side by side with each other. Until one early morning, as the crew was painting out graffiti, a homie named Miguel was gunned down. And then 6 weeks later, a homie named Arturo was killed. And so I remember going to the hospital at General Hospital and waiting as they operated on Art, and waiting for his mom to come from work. And I had to tell her that he didn't make it. And the scream pierced every heart and earshot. And I spent 3 hours there with the mom and the family. And then I was conscious of the fact that I needed to get back to the office before closing time, which was 5. And this is in our old headquarters. And so I do get back, and I'm at the front door and greeting everybody, and everybody's sobbing. And I'm trying to hold it together so I can be there for them. And then they all left, and I was alone, sitting behind my desk, or at least I thought I was alone, when from the back room where we had this conference table and room came Chino, and Chino was a big old vato. And I said, Chino, you're here. I thought I was alone. And he sat in front of my desk. And he looked at me and he said, I know your heart is breaking. And if I could take this pain away, I would. And then I've never had this experience before. The two of us in unison, we began to sob. And we wept so forcefully. And Chino folded his arms at the front of my desk and rested his head there and sobbed. And I held my face in my hands, and we sobbed for a really long time. Until finally he looked at me and he could find these words. He said, all of us are drowning in a river, but you reach in and you snatch us up, which made the both of us cry all the more. And when he could speak with more clarity, he looked at me and he said, I swear to you on everything I love, if someone gave me a choice, $1 million or a chance to swoop you up, I'd swoop you up. And I said, mijito, you just did. And he was a light that I could see by. It's not about announcing anything that Emmanuel, God is with us. It's about being that for each other. That's what the light is. Years ago, I knew a homie named Luis, and we called him Lulu. And he was a gang member. He lived in Aliso Village housing projects. And he eventually came and was in our 18-month program, just like Junior and Luis. And he found a place that nurtured him. He found a place that cherished him. If it's true enough that a traumatized person is going to find their way to traumatizing and causing damage, it's equally true that a cherished person will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. And that eventually happened for Lulu. But before that could happen, he was a gang member, locked up a lot. In those days, he sold crack cocaine, which was what people did. They'd run up to cars in the projects and sell drugs. And then he became his best customer. And he started to use drugs. And he was completely paralyzed and crippled by it. And I said, Miko, you really need rehab. You need to kind of stop. And he'd say, oh, no, I'm okay. I'm okay. Until finally he said, I'm ready. And I'm tired of being tired. So I drove him to a mountaintop not far from Los Angeles. And he began his own recovery. And 30 days into his time there, I had to call him and tell him that his younger brother, Eric, had been gunned down in the streets for no reason whatsoever. And, of course, he was devastated. And I said, Miko, I'm going to come and pick you up to bring you to the funeral, but I'm going to bring you straight back. And he says, I want you to. I like how recovery feels. And so I drive up to retrieve him, and he greets me out in the parking lot and gives me a big abrazo, and he gets in the car. And he says, last night I had a dream, and you were in it. And it was just the two of us, and we were in a room that was pitch black, no lights at all, no illuminated exit signs, no light creeping under the door. I know you're there, but we're not speaking. And suddenly in the darkness, he tells me that I happen to have a flashlight, and I reach into my pocket and I pull it out and I turn it on and I hold it steadily on the light switch on the wall. And he says, I'm glad you have a flashlight. And so he follows this beam of light with great trepidation. And he gets to the light switch, and now he's sobbing in the telling of this dream. And he takes a deep breath, and he flips the light switch on, and the room is flooded with light. And he's sobbing. And he says, the light is better than the darkness. Like he actually didn't know that to be the case. And so at this Christmas time, we decide to be a light that people can see by. For the people who walked in darkness want to see the light. Each one of you at Mitty has a flashlight. You know where to aim it. That has to be enough for you. You can't turn the light switch on for other people. But you have a flashlight. You know where to aim it. long lay the world in sin and error pining, till you appear and the soul feels its worth. We choose to take seriously then what Jesus took seriously: inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. Mitty is not the place you've come to. It was always going to be the place you go from. And you go from here to choose to be that kind of light where people can inhabit their nobility and dignity, and you end up inhabiting the same thing. We don't go to the margins to make a difference. We go there so that the folks at the margins make us different. So that all souls can feel their worth in the presence of each other. And that all distance can be bridged, and we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate. We belong to each other. And all of you here are on a noble mission. You own flashlights, you know where to aim them, and so you get to it. I invite you to be a light that people can see by. Please stand.